depending if there's young children in the family or not. So really it's an opportunity to become self-directing. All the rules and guidelines are laid out. You can either engage in those rules or you can execute your sentence, which we hope people don't do because it really doesn't change. It's talking about not changing anything. Going to jail doesn't change anything. Good morning.
Boy, sorry.
So one thing.
Can I jump in a minute?
Yeah.
Drug court is a problem-solving court. When the old approach that Grace explained was punitive, and so you go into the court and everybody there was there to punish you. Now, as a problem-solving court, over a period of time, clients learn that everybody in court really is there to support them getting sober. And so they have some accountability that they didn't have before. I was so happy when drug court started here because there were always clients, and they were the high-need, high-risk clients that just, I was going to say drove me crazy, but it was just so hard to treat them, to give them what they needed to become sober in this community. And I think one thing that was missing was that they felt like they were against the system. Now they feel, hopefully, that the system is on their side, and they're given a lot of support by the judge and the attorneys. I've been so amazed, really, after the training we took, to how Judge Kuzo and Molly Hicken and the probation officers just changed their approach quickly to these people when they were in court, to support them and ask them what they needed.
So typically, if any of you have ever been in the courtroom and ever had, it's very procedural and it's very prescriptive about what happens, but drug court, CIRC, is different. Substance Use Recovery Court is different. The participant comes to the front of the table, and we are looking at modifying that as well to have everybody sitting at the table versus having the judge up and the way we're set up right now. And the judge says, so, how are you doing today? What's been going well? Tell us about that. And the individual tells them about what's going well, what their struggles, if they've relapsed, if they have a sponsor. And one thing about CIRC, the recovery courts, they're highly researched, and the research shows that when a judge spends at least 3 minutes engaging with the participant, they have a much greater likelihood of succeeding. And when in that individual's life have they ever had an opportunity to have a dialogue with a judge or with the county attorney, your prosecuting attorney? You know, Molly's wonderful in court. She is asks good questions. She's so supportive. And again, that research shows that when the people who are prosecuting you turn around, as Greg said, and become support to you, it is different. And I just want to say, my journey with recovery court is been, I think, typical for most people, because I think we're angry when people commit crimes, and we're angry that people use, and we're angry about that. And there's this natural part that we want people, we want some sort of revenge or something, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work, and I've learned and grown so much over the last couple of years about the kinds of supports that do work. And I think the umbrella under which all of this exists is trauma. And I think that is one thing that the training has been really great about throughout the state, is that the experience, and I think this is a very powerful statement, the experience of trauma among people with substance abuse and mental health disorders, especially those with the justice system, is so high, it's considered almost a universal experience. And so the CIRC has a specific, And so what is trauma? How does trauma occur? Trauma is a result of an event, a series of events, a set of circumstances that's experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And I think that's really clear that Greg has really taught me a lot through our experience together in chemical dependency, chemical health, and recovery, is that there's an emotion or a feeling that's trying to be numbed out through the use of chemicals, and that trauma that if those of us that have ever experienced trauma, we have different people have different ways of coping, and for some people, using chemicals is a powerful way to cope. And so trauma is the overarching umbrella under which Recovery Court exists, and our training is very specific. Again, last spring when we were at the statewide training, it was a heavy focus on trauma, the effects on the brain, neuroscience and trauma, and that ability to change and what that requires. So again, why do we care about trauma? When an individual comes in to participate in the court, we see the tip of the iceberg. We see these behaviors. Oh, they're doing this behavior and that behavior, and this is what's going on. But what we don't see is what's underneath, and that's a lot more powerful, and it's guiding their behavior. And so the goal of Recovery Court is to think a little bit more about what might have happened prior to coming to Recovery Court, helping to remove those barriers and helping provide the predictable structures to help people recover. Because people who have experienced trauma, one of the most healing components is predictability and structure and rhythms in life versus chaos and scattered. So that is why CERC is very highly structured, and I think it is a very grounding thing for people who've experienced trauma and who are involved in the criminal justice system. As Greg was saying, the traditional criminal justice system can be very re-traumatizing. A lot of times people have had experiences in the court early in their life, maybe even through truancy, maybe their parents were involved in the court, so the history and the story that the family has about the court system is that it's bad and it's negative and it's against you. Multi-generational involvement in court. There's racial bias. There's fear of violence in the courtroom. Courtrooms can disrupt, and if you are a person who's had trauma and they've experienced violence in the past, going to court can be really, really scary. One of the things, if a person has been traumatized, and they can, one of the safety mechanisms of the human being is to be really in tune to your environment, and we call that sometimes hyper alert. We're in tune to who's around us, and if somebody's sitting behind you and you've a person who's have been traumatized and has had to protect themselves a lot, how do you think that person feels? Not that great. You know, it's kind of scary to be in court knowing that there's strangers sitting behind you and you're talking. And so one of the adaptations we're talking about is trying to get a table where the participant is not sitting with their back to the audience, so that they can see exits, so they know who's in the environment, because then they're going to be more present to hear the recommendations in support of the treatment court. That's that lack of control piece. And so, did you want to say anything more about that?
I was thinking something.
Thinking is good.
Some of the clients who were high risk, high need couldn't succeed because they would reoffend quickly, either commit another crime or violate probation in some way. And then they had a court appearance, and they had more punitive measures. And so their attitude seemed to be that they were in a fight they couldn't win. And their attention was on the consequences when they lose. And so the difference in drug court is that we see them every 2 weeks. They know what is required. And it just seems to be that accountability helps. It doesn't help everybody. We have people who reoffend, who continue to use. They go back to a more intensive kind of treatment, and then they come back again. But I think one of the most important things about drug court is that they agree to do it. They're given the choice. And the choice is to treat whatever they're in trouble, their illness, as a criminal justice matter, or treat it as an illness. And the ones who choose drug court choose to treat it as an illness, and we do everything we can to keep them engaged and address their needs. I wouldn't say it's easier than helping people who aren't in drug court, but the results are better. Statistics in this field are, I think, kind of questionable, because how do we collect these statistics? But the statistic for drug court is that upwards of 60% of the people in drug court succeed. The statistic for treatment throughout the country is that about 40% succeed. So we're convinced that for these high-risk, high-needs people, drug court will help them.
And when you think about the resources for the high-risk, high-need, these are individuals who have multiple encounters with law enforcement and the court system, and if you can help those individuals become more stable and engaged in the community, you've really shifted the use of resources to provide to other people in the community. So it's that's why there's the matrix of high risk, high need. That's why there's an intensive team, and it's highly effective. So one of the things, CERC, we strive to learn, develop, and apply trauma-informed and evidence-based practices to best support participants in recovery. And that is a really, really clear goal of Recovery Court. When we have trainings, again, the trainings are from people who are judges, who are attorneys, who are psychologists, and they have done the research, and they tell us that these are evidence-based approaches that are effective in helping people recovery. You know, you can't go rogue and say, well, one time I knew a guy who did this and that really helped him. That is not our approach. We have to follow that. And so when we come up with ideas, we as a team can challenge each other and say, is that evidence-based? Is that something that we know works? So we do, it is very formal. One thing I am talking about structure, I'm passing around the handbook that each participant gets. Jerry's got it now. Yes, and you can just see that there's a lot of structure in there, and it's a lot of clarity for the individual to know what's going on. So the last slide, well, we have one more slide. So we are just really proud of what we're doing and excited. And I know James, when he came here about 16 months ago, he went to a training, and I think that was the first big training I went to too. And we continue to learn, and I think that is so exciting. There's so much more research, and it's a really wonderful program that has bipartisan support throughout the United States to help people recover and to help people in the judicial system. And so it's a really great tool to help people, a collaborative approach to support people with their recovery. And I'm very proud of our team and the work that we're doing, and so grateful that we're able to participate in this process. So CERC does it reduces costs to society and government, and also helps breathe some hope into individuals' recovery. So we're really pleased to talk about this as part of National Recovery Month. Are there any questions? Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Are the fees prohibitive to people? The recovery court
Dave,
fees?
look at that. Trying to stump her right out of the door.
Well, I don't know if they are or aren't, but it's a requirement. You have, and so you pay fees if individuals would have fees regardless of if they were in recovery court or not.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's.
Or do you see people not being able to participate because of fees, I guess?
No.
I've not seen
No.
that.
Okay.
And I haven't seen it be a barrier. It takes a time to pay those fees, but they have been paying the fees. Sometimes a part of it gets waived. So I'm going to tell you, I've seen some people who are in recovery court that if I were asked 5 years ago what are chances they'll get sober, I'd said they're not in the group. Because they're repeat offenders, they repeatedly use substances. I just thought they were, we hadn't found an approach. Several of those people are succeeding in drug court. And they do not have a large income, but they are paying that fee. It's a responsibility. Part of the problem, a problem for people, especially in drug court, but also a lot of my clients, is they just don't think the rules apply to them. They have criminal thinking, and you ask them about the fees and child support. It's a huge amount of money that nobody could pay back. Because the attitude was, I'm just not going to do it for a variety of reasons. So paying those fees in drug court is really important because it shows that the rules do apply to them, including the financial costs of getting sober.
And they aren't in jail. If you're in jail,
They're not
you aren't
in jail.
making any money. If you're in recovery court, you're working, you're back in the community. And like Greg was saying, there's so many opportunities to reconnect. You can get your vehicle back. You can have a process for getting your license back. All these things can happen. That can get you to your job. So the fees are part of it. But this is a really cool thing. When you come to, if you could sit in on it if you'd like, but when the judge will say, I just want to say, the participant has paid $100 towards their fee, and so now they only have $500 left, and everybody claps. It's just like, it's not a typical courtroom, and he'll say that is just awesome, and it's just really wonderful that you're able to pay that. And so we're bringing that, everybody is responsible for fees and paying for certain things in life, and so that it provides structure and honors that person's ability to start participating in a more typical version of life. So,
Skin in the game, right?
yeah.
Myron?
Yeah, isn't, making amends or restitution sort of an indicator of success in any program? Do you find that out, that people are willing to say, gosh, yeah, I'm responsible for a lot of these things that happen, which is a positive kind of
Yeah,
stage
owning their
or a
behavior.
phase to go through?
It's definitely a part of recovery.
Yeah.
Any kind of recovery program that a person's involved in, making amends, correcting the wrongs is part of that.
Jerry?
It's so powerful too. Now I'm 16 years since I got sober, which is one day really, good today. Making amends just scared me to death. To face these people who I'd either harmed or embarrassed, and I really didn't want to do it. And but I was forced out of coincidence to do it. I started running into these people, and I would just make my amends on the spot. And what I didn't realize is how good it would feel.
And so
And that is the way to leave that behind. We try to, don't carry your past with you. Well, you have to deal with your past to leave it behind. And, it was kind of a remarkable experience. And I think people in our recovery court, when they become responsible, experience the same thing. They're doing something they probably didn't think they could do.
And they're making amends to the community via
Right.
having that relationship with the county attorney and with the judge, the probation officer, the person from the county sheriff's office who's probably arrested them a couple of times. It's a whole transformation, and I also want to say that there's various types of courts to not only substance use recovery, there's mental health recovery courts, there's veterans courts specifically for veterans in larger communities. In larger communities, too, men and women might be separated in recovery court because of the different dynamics, and so we're small. We do everything in one court, but so I just want to point that out, that there's variations that you will hear about in different communities.
One of the surprising things that has happened is people in drug court apologize to the police officer that had been chasing them and arresting them for years. And that's a surprise. I mean, it doesn't seem like a big thing, but usually, the contacts they've had over the years can be very personal.
Go ahead.
My turn?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm thinking about the restorative justice program that's newly developing in our community, and hearing you describe recovery court leads me to think, well, there's certainly some similarities or commonalities there. Is there any way that recovery court overlaps with restorative justice, either the program itself or at least the principles of restorative justice?
Well, the recovery court program is very strict. It's evidence-based. And so what that means, especially now as substance use treatment is evolving in Minnesota, the emphasis is on evidence-based programs. And with evidence-based programs, you administer the program the way it was studied in order to get the results. And so some kind of adjunct to recovery court can be looked at as long as it doesn't change the approach, I would say. But I don't see any reason why not, honestly.
It's a really interesting idea, and that'd be a good question to send up to some of the people that are doing research and seeing if that's a evidence-based approach in recovery that we could be using. That'd be really wonderful.
Yeah. Well, our county attorney certainly is involved in both programs, and
Yeah.
it'd be interesting to hear a little more about how that could, the cross currents
That's
could
a great
could work.
thought.
Yeah.
But evidence, I know in treatment now, evidence-based is becoming what it should have been all along, the watchword. And I'm hearing from people in other programs who are being audited, and they may have, say, a person come in and teach yoga for 2 hours. They're being cited for that now because whoever they've hired to teach yoga isn't doing something evidence-based, so they can't bill for that, and they're going to be cited. The way it affects my program isn't very much, really, but we have had AA speakers come in during the 2 hours of outpatient, and we can still do that, but when the AA speaker's there, we can't bill for that time. But overall, it's a really healthy approach because there are so many good evidence-based programs, and I would say they're easy to administer because when you buy into the program, it really shows you what to do each time you meet as a group. But there's a lot of confidence from the clients too, when instead of me rambling for 2 hours and trying to be funny, we do something that they see is really an approach that's been tried and true. And
I think a good example of that is, it's called MRT, Moral Recognition Therapy. It's a therapy that is really guided at helping people be honest, and where the group participants help people be honest, and it's really focused on honesty. And like Greg said, that a lot of people who have history and survive, are in a real survival mode, figure out a lot of workarounds to honesty and participating in society. So this is a process to help them develop their honesty, and we've seen how powerful immersion in that type of program is for somebody who's in recovery. So we just keep learning all the time, and it's exciting.
Myron?
If I could just comment on that, I serve as the liaison to restorative justice and sit on an advisory board, and so I'm somewhat familiar with the referrals. And briefly, I think the county attorney's office would be better to answer this, but what I've seen so far in the referrals is that substance abuse or misuse could be part of the dynamics, and restorative justice is a focus on the victim and the perpetrator. And so there's some similar kinds of things, and either it's reformation or restitution then as part of that. And it's at a much lesser degree of what you'd call breaking the law. It's trying to get, some kind of preventive measures in for some of these people that get into trouble. And I know that alcohol has been involved in some of those, not to the extent where you would end up in court, but it is a dynamic. So it's hopefully providing another preventive layer for some of these perpetrators that are starting to get into trouble. And, we don't know how successful that is, except by generally there's some research saying that, it's helping people. So it's, and it's a very cost-effective way to do it here because it's done with volunteers that go through a lot of training, yeah. So I don't know if that helps. But.
Thank you.
So Allison, what programs do we have, since a lot of this discussion has been trauma-based and a lot of people in recovery have had an early trauma? What are we doing in our preventative care if we know someone has trauma? Are we working with them at all, knowing that this could be the path that they end up on?
I can mention a few programs, but I think Grace would most likely be the best person to answer this question. Certainly, the sooner we can work with the family, the better. So our programs like Family Home Visiting, which we're now contracting with the Sawtooth Mountain Clinic, and in particular the new evidence-based program that they will be rolling out shortly, Healthy Families America, is very focused on that trauma lens and preventing child abuse in high-risk situations. So that would be the first thing that comes to mind. But Grace, if there's anything else that you would add to that from Children and Family Services?
Yeah, I think that our shift over the last 5 years has been to put more intensity into support for families early on, and again, instead of asking that question, what's wrong with this person, to think about what's happened to this person, how can we help this person become part of society in a way that that's comfortable to them and their choice, but yet safe, and how can we help kids? And I don't even know if I want to say this, but I'll say it. You know, our out-of-home placement rates have gone down so much, and I think it's because we've worked really closely with families to help them repair some of the things that have been going on in their families so that they can stay together. It's a major source of trauma, having a child leave the home, and major source of trauma, of course, is any kind of loss. And so we're pretty tuned into it. And so I know that there's, at the clinic, they're going to be doing the ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences training, to teach people to be spokespeople for that and educate the community about it. And I'm glad you brought that up, Heidi, because it does come full circle that we do what we do.
Yeah, we can't prevent everything, but.
No, but if we can, we see what happens to people who have deep trauma, who have not had a chance to heal and recover earlier in their life. And so we are trying to shift our efforts to that early intervention. So just by having the proper level of staff and spending more time with families and helping them recover and support them in recovery, I think I hope we're setting the groundwork. And I agree, family home visiting is definitely an evidence-based approach that significantly decreases childhood maltreatment.
See, and until your presentation, I wouldn't have even associated it with having an early trauma. I guess I just go back 30 years and just assume that you started partying at 15 and it was so much fun you just didn't stop.
Yeah.
Dave, did you have another question?
Yes, thank you. Just reading the couple slides on trauma, it struck me that, well, I was just curious, at what point does stress become trauma? Like, it seemed like you could almost interchange the two. And trauma is a much stronger word, and, stress everyone has stress. But just my understanding is oftentimes people will start using substances just if their stress level gets to a certain point. And so it's just interesting kind of touching on the preventative side of things, if we can somehow address that and how to
Mitigate stress.
Yeah, before it becomes traumatic, to that level.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
I will.
Because the definition of trauma that's used here is if the person believes their life was at risk. And so it's really all about that person's experience and not necessarily an objective look. I have a 5-year-old who is getting beaten by their father, and objectively you say, well, he'll never kill him, so his life wasn't at risk, but that 5-year-old might feel like he's going to be killed or just has that much trauma.
Yeah, the slide said the life-threatening aspect, but I thought it was an or conjunction, and so it said harmful. I forget what the other wording was. So that just is what made me think, going back a few steps, what that meant. But thank you.
It's interesting when you talk about when they sit in the room and to be to the back, which I am a trauma survivor, so that's what I do. But for me, the whole reason why I never drank or did drugs was that control, to make sure that there was no one behind me and I had full control of the entire situation. So this has been very educational to me, to find out that someone would go in that other direction.
That hyper alert and fearfulness of having somebody behind you, yeah. Again, trauma is a very individual thing, and Greg and I could have the same experience, and for him it's traumatizing, for me it isn't, and it's just that amazing gene pool that we have and learning experience. Everybody's different and how we respond, but some people, repeated stress and trauma, all of us have a limited capacity to cope, and under the right circumstances, that experience does become traumatizing, and it's evidenced by behaviors like such as intrusive thoughts, disruption in sleep, irritability. There's really specific diagnostic. I wonder if Matthew would be probably better at this one. I don't know if you all met Matthew last week. He's doing the community support work. And when you talk about trauma and that whole continuity of support for people, it's one thing to go to the therapist, but Matthew really helps people integrate behaviors into their lives. And would you say trauma, how would you do, some of those intrusive thoughts, trouble with sleep, irritability, what are some other behaviors that distinguish it from somebody who's stressed, who might not have their life might fall, they'll continue to pay the bills, they're just stressed. I think we all know what that feels like, but trauma is a different level.
Yeah, dissociation especially.
Oh, dissociations, that's a good one too, good indicator.
It's
And Jerry
very
knows
effective,
and
too.
Carla.
It's a good tool to have.
And I had one other question that it might be, well, anyways. Thank you very much for presenting, and it seems like a very, very valuable program. How did it start in 2017? Why did it take until 2017? And
Good question. I wasn't involved right at the beginning. Were you?
It was Steve Boru who started this, and there was resistance.
I was going to ask that. Yeah.
That's about all I can say. There was resistance.
Is that resistance ongoing? Okay.
Well, not here.
Okay.
Not
Okay.
here.
But it's kind of
there
that
are-
evolution I talked about, how like really we're going to help people
Sure.
that who have committed these crimes. You know, we have an attitudinal shift had to occur, and I'm not saying that people have bad attitudes, but when you don't know about something, you're mistrustful. But boy, the more we've learned, we're believers.
It's part of the resistance was workload, being afraid that this was another thing we had to do. In my case, I could see right away it was going to help me because these people who were so difficult to treat now would have this program. But for probation officers, it's more work, frankly.
I could just comment, my first year on Arrowhead Regional Corrections, I went to a state conference with the professionals and had a chance to talk to Steve. And I know that a lot of this started as well, but he was a real leader here because he found in probation that this punitive system was not working in Cook County. And in fact, in the whole Arrowhead region, there was a lot of discussion, because I went to a session, and I think it was Judge Flurkey in Duluth that I'll never forget. He made a presentation at the state conference, Northeast Conference of professionals working in corrections, and he made some real strong case about, trying to go upriver to where the problems start more and more, because the old court system was just the end of the road, and you sort of go over the waterfall, fall into, and he had a lot of statistics about recidivism, and what we've been doing with drug and alcohol-related offenses is punish, and there's just so much psychological research on it that doesn't work, because you're just punishing people that have been punished enough, and I've met some people that are in the system, and some of them lean to say, the hell with it, I just want to go to jail, because that's their image of themselves. And so I think the more we can get into preventative stuff, and I know we have a focus on this at the Y People's Institute, I was involved in that in the cities, where you get mentors for youth and in structured settings. So that's what the conversation I had with him, and it was really a good I would agree with that from my little experience in the county.
I'd like to be sure I said what I mean. About resistances program, I had some of that too. I just thought, how much more work is this going to be, and when am I going to have the time to do it? And so, but the people who are involved in drug court now or here are really on board. There's no resistance at all from them. They work hard on drug court days. They believe in the system. I'm afraid that probation people are listening and saying, well, that isn't how I feel.
And we help each other out too. I think it's really increased collaboration across systems. And so if probation needs to, somebody needs to have a diagnostic assessment, they're in jail. How do you do that? And so, oh, hey, we can figure that out, and we can make that happen. The silos, everybody's in their lanes, and so that communication and collaboration really helps solve problems and helps.
Bobby and I found out there's another county that sometimes you'll be in jail for a month before you get your evaluation because they have silos apparently. So we were like, that doesn't happen where we are. So thank you for that work on that. Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you very much for your questions.
Yeah,
and
thanks for coming
listening.
down.
Yeah. If you have any other questions, I know Allison knows a lot about this too, and we can figure out the answers to them. So.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Allison, director report.
Just want to again echo thank you, Grace, thank you, Greg, for your presentation and for everything you do to support recovery in Cook County, and to the partners who aren't here but are integral to this process that Grace and Greg have mentioned many times and helped contribute to our News Herald article this week as well about the recovery court process in Cook County. So thank you all. And thanks Matthew, Jade, and James, our mental health team. We're here for part of the meeting this morning as well. So thank you all.
Thanks, Allison.
Thanks, you guys.
So I will start out with a staffing update, as always. The only update I have for you this morning is just that we're continuing to evaluate the proposal, the staffing request that we put into our draft 2020 budget. That position was a treatment coordination position to access some of the services and revenue that are newly authorized through the state of Minnesota to support individuals in recovery. We had initially proposed pairing that with a public health education position to provide community outreach and education in the area of substance use disorder prevention. As we are learning more in opportunities that exist for our agency following the closure of HDC, some of the gaps that were created when the HDC office closed here in Grand Marais, we are looking at the potential of more formally offering daytime mental health crisis response. Currently, HDC holds the contract to provide after-hours crisis response in Cook County. That's coordinated regionally. It's a regional contract. It's through the Birch Tree Center. And we do have staff, we do have trained professionals within Cook County who are providing that service. Following the closure of the HDC office, that was a gap in having someone designated to provide daytime crisis response in Cook County. Our agency has taken on that role in an informal capacity, really in partnership with law enforcement staff or emergency department staff who are often the front lines of that daytime crisis response. So Grace and I have been in conversation with the state to learn more about what that might look like for our agency to take that on in a more formal capacity by registering as a daytime crisis response provider with the state. We would be able to access revenue from the state to bill for that service. So as with our proposal to bring that community support services in-house, we are adding capacity to provide a service that's already falling back on our staff in many cases because we are the agency in town. We are that front door for a lot of people. But this would be a way for us to more formally access the revenue to provide that service. So again, we're just learning more about what that might look like. I wanted to introduce it to you early on and to let you know that we would provide a more formal proposal of what that might look like. But our initial thoughts of how that might restructure a 2020 staff position is that we would be pairing the treatment coordination with the daytime crisis response. Those really go hand in hand. So rather than pairing the public health, the unallocated public health staff hours with the treatment coordination, we would consider a standalone part-time public health position, and then pairing the treatment coordination again with that daytime crisis response. This would not impact our levy request for 2020, that .74 request from the Public Health and Human Services Department, as we would be accessing unallocated mental health services dollars that are already within our budget. And again, we would have the opportunity to draw down on revenue for providing those services. So again, just wanted to introduce that idea to you all today. I brought it up at our local advisory council for mental health meeting last week. And as we continue to learn more about what that might look like from the state, we'll bring a more formal proposal before you. But again, no impact on our initial levy request that was submitted last month. There's a potential policy change that we're watching at the federal level that could impact our work here in Cook County related to SNAP eligibility. The federal government, the USDA, has proposed a rule change that would limit SNAP access in the state of Minnesota because of the broad-based categorical eligibility provisions that were put into place back in November of 2010. And I have handouts for you related to this. So within the materials, and I apologize that these didn't get out in the agenda packets, but we'll link to them within the minutes so that you have electronic copies, and I can make these available electronically before the next meeting as well if you'd like. So at the top of the packet is a handout from the State Department of Human Services explaining broad-based categorical eligibility in Minnesota. We also have a letter that was submitted to the USDA by the DHS Commissioner Jody Harpstead earlier this month, as well as an estimate of the persons who are currently eligible for SNAP under the state policy who would lose SNAP eligibility under the proposed rule changes. So you can see for Cook County, the estimated impact monthly average SNAP enrollees would be 45 individuals within Cook County who could lose SNAP benefits. Statewide, that number is just over 35,000.
And do we have other programs to fill in the gap for those 45?
Not like SNAP, no. So this could have ripple effects on our food shelf, Ruby's Pantry, other nutrition support programs in the community. So
Backpack program, the backpack program at school.
Program. Mm-hmm. So what broad-based categorical eligibility did in 2010 was it increased the income limit for SNAP households from 130% of the federal poverty guideline to 165%. So what that breaks down to is 165% of the federal poverty guideline is $34,296 a year for a family of 3. So these are not high-income households. Another way of thinking of this would be a single parent with 2 children earning between $13 and $16 an hour is that 130% to 165% federal poverty guideline. At the maximum income limit for these household sizes, the SNAP benefit is very small. So as households have earned income, that SNAP benefit is reduced greatly. Another factor of the broad-based categorical eligibility is that units who are eligible for SNAP but at a 0 benefit, meaning they have income that is high enough that would not qualify them to receive an actual SNAP benefit in terms of the dollars on their EBT card each month, but they are categorically eligible at a $0 benefit. That means they're automatically eligible for programs like free and reduced school lunches, WIC, and other programs without having to meet additional eligibility requirements, without having to fill out additional paperwork. So again, there are ripple effects of this policy change in families that are at risk of hunger, that they could also be losing benefits like WIC and free and reduced school lunches. The elimination of broad-based categorical eligibility would also require an asset test for the SNAP program, which has not been in place since 2010. Most likely to access SNAP because of the removal of the asset test are seniors, who, again, are more likely to have accumulated assets within their lifetime. In the letter, I believe it quotes that prior to broad-based categorical eligibility, only 28% of Minnesota's low-income seniors qualified for SNAP. Today, almost 60% of Minnesota's low-income seniors qualify. So again, this is a proposed rule change. The USDA is required to review and respond to all public comments before finalizing a rule change. The 60-day public comment period for this proposed rule change expires on September 23rd. Yes, go ahead.
Would it be appropriate for our board to send a letter to Representative Stauber in regards to this? Is that?
I think that would certainly be an option. From what I learned at my last meeting at the statewide Human Services Directors Association from the Department of Human Services is that they're really encouraging people to submit comments through the formal comment process, and that there are some resources to be able to do that, either by going through the USDA website. Otherwise, Hunger Solutions Minnesota is an agency that helps advocate for policy change that reduces hunger in Minnesota. But the volume of comments is a benefit in this process, in that the number of unique comments. We also shared this with the Public Health and Human Services Advisory Committee, and some of our members there had shared experiences with going through federal rule change processes, and some insights that there's an automated process that can kind of scrub through the comments and see if it's a form template letter or not. So the more that you can personalize that, the better, if you're interested in commenting on this process.
And is everyone on this board comfortable with each member commenting as an individual? Just a nod of heads. Just for the Board of Commissioners, we do not comment as individuals. That's why I'm asking. We comment as a full body. But in this situation, individual, unique comments is a good thing. And I just want to make sure that everyone is supportive of that.
That you do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I should also say that this would have implications for our staff as well in learning policy changes, additional administrative eligibility requirements, and verifying assets. Again, potential where we might have families who are struggling or individuals who are struggling and aren't able to access SNAP benefits due to this policy change. That may be in a crisis where we would need to access other funding sources to support and prevent an emergency. So there are other implications within our agency as well.
Carla?
Well, I just had a thought, and I understand about not boilerplate, but it might be very powerful what Dave is suggesting if the government of a county stood behind this to our representatives. And that certainly wouldn't be a boilerplate letter that you would write. It's just a thought.
Mm-hmm. Myron?
Yeah, I think I'd support that too, and I think that's an appropriate time to really commend and thank some people in the community that are very concerned about this issue, and even though it's not enough, I know that Tim and Beth Kennedy made a gift of $5,000 to the Cook County Community YMCA to have snacks at the Y, where any child can come in and get some food after school. And I know that they're providing we have the SNAP or the backpack program through the Extension Service and so forth, and would really like to commend them too. But I think I would agree with Commissioner Mills' concern that if we can agree as a board, we should maybe address it in that manner.
And I just tried to find how to comment individually. It's not like click here to comment. It's search, go through the weeds, and I still haven't found it. So it's not an easy thing to do. Maybe I'm not too surprised, but,
Hunger Solutions, is that a website to go to for comments?
Hunger Solutions Minnesota is an advocacy organization. They have resources to help people learn how to file a comment related to this
Oh,
proposed
okay.
change.
Okay. All right.
I'd like to make a motion to write a letter to Representative Stauber about this and our support for keeping the broad-based categorical eligibility.
I will support that if you'd be willing to amend it to send it to Tom Bach, Rob Eklund, and have Allison compose it for us.
I am very willing to amend that, yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments?
So you seconded it?
I did. Anyone opposed? All right, motion passes. And more work for Allison. If you could just send that out to us, too, thank you.
I can do that.
Any other
I do
wonderful
have
updates?
A few more updates. So after our board meeting this morning, Grace Grenager and I will be sharing proposed revisions to Cook County's tobacco ordinance at the committee of the whole meeting, which would limit access to e-cigarettes, vaping instruments, and other commercial tobacco products in Cook County. The ordinance was reviewed and the policy recommendations were made by the Public Health Law Center. I met with County Attorney Molly Hicken to go through some of the revisions last week, and both Molly and Sheriff Pat Eliason will be at the meeting later this morning. And again, this is just for discussion to introduce those revisions to the board at the whole at this point. And then a reminder as well that we have the panel discussion on youth vaping at the Arrowhead Center for the Arts this evening at 5:30. And an invitation was sent out in the meeting materials in that second revision of the agenda. I wanted to provide an update to the board on the Disability Services Innovation Grant that our agency received in 2018. That was a 2-year grant project that our agency applied for through the state of Minnesota, and we received and worked in partnership with ISD 166 and the Human Development Center. We have officially ended our contract with HDC for the utilization of those grant monies to employ a part-time employment specialist. There was an individual who was hired by HDC to work in that position. He was also an ISD 166 employee and had very limited hours during the school year to provide those services. And again, just a reminder, these were supported employment services to school-age children in Cook County with disabilities to help them access unsubsidized employment opportunities in the community. HDC had challenges in recruiting and retaining someone in that position full-time and permanently. One of the greatest successes of that program that I'm happy to share with you all was the creation of a caregiver support group for Cook County families with children with developmental disabilities. The group is facilitated by Julie Kinney, who is a social worker in Public Health and Human Services and the waiver case manager. Supervisor of the Adult and Home and Community-Based Services unit in PHHS, Martina Johnson, is working with Julie Kinney and DHS to find out options for reallocating some of those remaining grant funds, knowing that there won't be a person in that employment services position for the school year. One of the options that they're looking at is organizing and hosting an educational event with speakers in Cook County to provide information and resources on filling gaps for individuals living with disabilities in Cook County. Johnson and Kinney also presented and represented PHHS at the DHS Minnesota Age and Disabilities Odyssey Conference in Duluth. Sorry, that was not a DHS conference. It's just the Minnesota Age and Disabilities Odyssey Conference in Duluth. And that was on July 31st and August 1st. So they were asked by DHS to represent this innovation grant at the conference. They created an e-poster, a large research poster that was projected through the duration of the conference And were also asked to take place in a pre-conference intensive where they talked about their experience with the project. They joined DHS and 37 other projects that were funded through the Innovation Grant to talk about their experiences, some of the successes, and some of the challenges as well with that project. So I just wanted to recognize Julie and Martina for their work in bringing that grant to Cook County.
Awesome.
In the consent agenda was the financials through August. Through August, we are at 67% of the way through the year. We've spent 57% of our budgeted expenses and have received 59% of our planned revenue. And this is to be expected at this point in the year. We're always at least 1 month behind on paying expenses and in receiving revenues for our department. Last, under items for board action is the recommendations related to public health funding for 2020. Our subcommittee of the Cook County Public Health and Human Services Advisory Committee met on September 9th to review the applications for 2020 funds. We followed a very similar process as with last year. We improved in some areas based on the feedback from the review committee, most notably by allowing the review committee members almost a month to have those application materials to review in advance of our meeting last week, in which we actually ranked, which the committee ranked and made those funding recommendations. We received just 8 applications this year, so a little less than last year. The total request of funds was $152,560, so again, a decrease from the 2019 process. We had allocated $133,505 within our 2020 budget towards this fund. The committee was tasked with very difficult decisions, again, as with last year, in making those funding recommendations, but we're able to reach consensus related to the recommendations for 2020 funding. Again, those funds were included in our preliminary budget and levy request for 2020.
All right. Can I get a motion?
A question, will we get a list of,
It's in your packet.
I'm sorry, I missed it. Okay,
Would you like me
thank
to?
you.
It's enclosed in the packet.
Do you want to,
I opened it for him.
okay.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to, granting the funds, a total of $133,505 to the 7 organizations, gone through the review process there.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Go ahead.
I see that they came up with 7 of them. Who was the one that got left out?
So the one organization that the committee did not recommend receive funding was Legal Aid of Minnesota.
Why don't you change it, you did 7 of them. You could take a little from all of them and do all 8. Legal aid is pretty important to some people.
Jerry?
If I could comment as a member of that subcommittee, it wasn't at all that we thought legal aid wasn't a very worthy service. But one of the things we looked at was what kind of resources that an organization already had. Even go so far as to look at the ratio of resources on hand or funds on hand versus the amount that was being requested. And we wound up feeling that legal aid, to put it plainly, didn't demonstrate the level of need for this particular money from Cook County that the other programs did, and decided that we would rather see the money go to the other programs.
Carla?
No, I just
She's
wanted
responding
to
to
say,
you.
I know where you're coming from, because I felt maybe a token amount, but they are very flush, and they will continue to be able to serve without us giving a token amount to them. They requested, I believe, $5,000. But we were stunned. None of us realized legal aid was that well funded.
Does Cook County put anything into legal aid? out of anything else.
Not to my knowledge, no.
No, I think it's always fallen under this category. Dave?
The total requested, was 152,560, and if we subtracted the 5,000 from legal aid, we'd see that it's 147,560. And so I think the total requests already would exceed what we had allocated to distribute. And so I think, is it correct to assume that everyone got less than? No, it's not. Okay.
Not correct.
And
So
you did it based on?
Some were prioritized as having a greater need or a greater impact in the community, and so they got their full funding. Others, there were, I don't know what, 2 or 3 or maybe 4 others that got reductions to some degree.
I think
Okay.
2 were fully funded, is that correct? And
I'd have to look back at
I
the
think
notes, but
so.
there were a number of
And then the
organizations that
rest-
received partial
yeah.
funding.
yeah.
It seems like a very rigorous and thorough process, so I appreciate your work on that. Probably very difficult too,
It was.
to make those calls. And in terms of legal aid too, I'm sure that wasn't,
Did Cooperation Station go up from last year? Were they at 20,000 last year?
Oh, from
I
last
have
year.
that data at home, I don't have it with me.
Yeah, it was close.
It's about that, I think.
They had requested a little more than they got. It wasn't much of a reduction. But it may have been that they requested a bit more than they had last year. I should have brought that, and I forgot.
The 2019 Public Health Community Grants are on the county website. Cooperation Station was granted 22,659 last year for 2019.
and no, there was no legal aid last year.
And if I'm not mistaken, it was for the same reason.
So I believe there were 3 organizations last year that were not funded through this process.
So legal aid did not get funded last year, Heather.
Mhm.
Any further questions?
No.
I had a question that was already answered, but I should just go on record that one of the organizations last year that was not funded was the Violence Prevention Center, and they did not request funding this year, which I thought was a significant note.
They have a history of requesting when they need, and they've been very good about, and didn't they one year return?
I don't know about
Or not?
returning, but.
They didn't take the full funding because they didn't need it.
But I was on that board for years, and yes, if they don't need it, they don't ask.
We should make that for the record, huh, Carla? We both serve on that board, so.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was
Previously.
there.
We're not up to any funny business. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any opposed? All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. All right, committee reports. Arrowhead Economic Opportunity Agency. Dave.
I think I already reported on last month's, so
Okay.
nothing to report. Same with Arrowhead Health Alliance. We had a meeting that was canceled because of attendance with our conference.
Bobby, they're meeting today.
Who?
Arrowhead Regional Corrections.
We meet on Friday.
Yeah, they sent out an extra packet flyer. Yeah, you probably didn't get it because
I'll
I
get
got
it
it
next week.
yesterday. I got it yesterday, so you'll probably get it tomorrow. Anything to update for them?
No.
Okay. Ginny, Arrowhead Regional Development.
We're going to meet Thursday, but if I might just take a moment to report from AMC, I'm on the Health Committee, And it took a lot of discussion to bring forth 3 actions that we're going to talk about at our district meeting, and just for Allison to note this. The 3 actions that were passed that we're going to look at is out-of-home placement, mental health and substance abuse, use, and procurements. And for everybody here, procurements is something that is managed care within there was over 44 counties that did not feel that they were being heard on this for delivery services. So just for Allison's sake, that's a top priority for us to talk about at our district meeting in October.
Thank you. Arrowhead Regional, that was yours. Community Health Board, Dave.
Yeah, we just had a meeting yesterday, and I'm happy to report that we're going to keep CHB as is. St. Louis County has decided to go all in. It's part of their natural process when there's a change, any significant change, and in this case a change in leadership within CHB, to take a look at it and reevaluated it, and they apologize for any stress or worry that we may have experienced. Yep, and I had an opportunity to meet Commissioner Beth Olson at the meeting, and hadn't met her before, so that was great to make that connection. And I guess I didn't have any one-on-one conversation, but just to get a better feel of the boards of our partners, you know.
Great.
I think that's all.
Okay, Public Health and Human Service Advisory, Jerry or Carla?
Well, just a few highlights from there. One thing is that Grace reported for Frankie that the 4 counties are sending a letter to St. Luke's and Essentia that as they move forward with development in Cloquet, they consider including mental health services in their moving forward there. The other thing would be the EDA is looking again into maybe doing something for senior housing. Don't know on what continuum. And the other thing is Grand Portage has hired a lot of new people to fill positions, and they've hired a new Head Start a new director that will merge Head Start and daycare. They've hired Holly James to be the director of Community Center, and they've hired Melissa Brown to be working with the youth on a program, and they've rehired Rebecca, and I can't read my handwriting. Is it Deshane?
Deshaun.
Oh, okay. To be Office of Claims and Office Supervisor, and they have hired Colette Peterson to work in the memory care programs. Have I forgotten anything? It's a lot.
I think that was that Memory Keepers thing they got through UND. So.
Right. So they've done a lot, and we tweaked a little bit the Public Health and Human Services client survey. And that's
Awesome.
it.
Just a comment that we had, as always, a very full agenda, and it's a challenge to get through everything. A lot of discussion about that Community Health Board issue, which I'm pleased to hear has been resolved, hopefully. The only thing that I can see that we haven't already talked about in this meeting is that we were intending to review the Community Health Assessment and Improvement Plan, which is an excellent piece of work, and Grace Grenager gets so much credit for putting that together. But we just didn't have adequate time, and it was the sense of the committee that it would be better to call the stakeholders group that was creating it in the first place back together one more time to give feedback and give it the thorough kind of review that it deserves. So that's going to happen.
Great. Ginny, Healthcare Planning Committee.
Yes, we did meet. This was Kate Serba's first meeting alone. And Allison, of course, reported on some things. I won't go over all that because we've heard all that before. Grace talked about her trip out to Washington, D.C. Valerie reported from the foundation that they're working on updating several things in the area. They're not doing the golf scramble this year. They're going to come up with something different in Lutzen.
Yeah. North Shore Collaborative, Dave?
Nothing to report.
Emergency preparedness?
We canceled the last meeting because of conflicts, and we're having a meeting next month.
Okay. And now we have added to the agenda Local Advisory Council for Mental Health, since it is fully kicked off and meeting, and that would be Carla or Jerry to report. Or I can if you weren't prepared, because we added it at the last minute.
We're prepared, but you could go ahead.
It's wonderful, the participation that we have in it and that we're moving forward. It's always hard to start up a new one and get bylaws and rules and policy, but the staff has dug right in. And so that's my input, and you two can do the technical part. I just want to do the cheerleader part.
And we have our bylaws all in place, and we're structured and ready really to dig into some specific issues related to mental health. Next time, we sort of laid some groundwork.
Right.
Maybe you
We're
want to say
completely
more.
ready, and a lot of people are interested in forming subcommittees to look at specific issues in mental health and then bringing it back to the group. So it's looking good.
Excellent. Myron?
Yes, if I could just share some information in trying to identify where this belongs. I guess I've decided to mention it here. We had a budget advisory meeting yesterday, and a discussion came up on the arts grants, and especially some of the members that represent our community, citizens that represent the districts. There was some concern about that, and I think a conversation, and Jenny, you could add to this, but it was toward the end of the meeting that we sort of came to a consensus with one dissenting, because they just didn't agree with doing this at all, was to allocate that to two organizations, the Playhouse and also the other one was the Arts Colony. And what we would like to recommend from the advisory committee is that would be allocated for youth programming. And so that it would have sort of a twist of, maybe fitting under this category generally, but it sort of ended up with the budget committee. It came before the board, and I know that we passed a motion on that, but it seemed like that was a good compromise, because there were some concerns expressed about it. Maybe that's a way, if we could, when we do the preliminary levy, if we could, or it's a question, do we need to specify that we would like that to go to youth programming to those organizations?
Great.
So I just thought I'd bring that up, and
Thank you.
I would look for some suggestions on how we could do that, getting into our next meeting.
Okay. And then for the good of the order, I have a good of the order today, so you all can relax. You won't be put on the spot. Alice Weck is a member of the Gunflint Trail Community, Poplar Lake Community. And she passed away on August 31st. But she quietly and diligently gave to this community. And so I would just like to recognize her. Public health, clean waters, equality for youth and children, she started back in the 70s. And so we have a lot of people in our community that give as individuals, that are on committees, that just show up. Frankie Jarko is one of them that we all know. And there are many people in this community that we just don't see or we don't recognize because they're just doing the work. So, for the good of the order, to Alice and anyone who's just doing the work for us. And meetings to note is tonight, the community panel on youth vaping at Arrowhead Center for the Arts, 5:30 to 7. There may be a quorum of commissioners present, but as we all know, there's no business being conducted, so.
I had
Carla?
something for the good of the order.
Go ahead.
Also, this is maybe inappropriate, I don't know, But I feel like I want to formally, at this board, recognize all the wonderful work that Jeff has put in for our county. And I have had the privilege of being on this when we had a personnel director, another county administrator, and Jeff. And I believe, from my perspective, it's just night and day, the difference in the functioning of the county as a government. Everyone was well-meaning and worked hard, but commissioners were overwhelmed because they had to also run the county as long as with everything else they have to be informed in. And the next person's health failed rapidly when he came in, and tragically he lost his life at a young age. And Jeff arrived, and he has put in systems pervasive throughout that I think have benefited directors and staff, and I now see a smooth running machine. He was also there working, I suspect overtime, helping during the time when we had an issue in public health with the directors, with the loss of a director suddenly, helping staff working, and I feel he empowers the citizen volunteers as well as the staff. And so I can name 1,000 things, but I think it's important to recognize that. And I know, as always, when positions are vacated, they are, up for review and looking at it. And I can only think of the analogy I once heard from someone, and it had to do with real estate, and you're not a piece of real estate. But the analogy was that you can buy a really perfect home. Everything is very nice and beautiful about it, in great order. And there are two types of buyers. And one type might just maintain it, forever and keep it like that. And then there's people that just consume it. So my concern would be that right now this is at a fantastic level and physically sound. And I would really hope that we will continue to do that and not just consume all the struggle that has been put into building this.
Thank you, Carla.
Thank you.
You're here.
Anyone else for the good of the order? With that, we will adjourn and take a 2.5-minute break before we start our special meeting.
I totally agree with what Carla said. Sorry to see you go.
I appreciate those comments very much.
Excellent. You did a great job.
Well, next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.